Well, big step for the Seattle Police Department getting out of federal oversight. New numbers show a dramatic decline in the department's use of force.
Yeah, remember that police officers using unconstitutional force is what sparked the consent decree in the first place. Simone Del Rosario has these new numbers from the Department of Justice tonight and explains what they mean.
So what we're seeing is just a drastic change from our Seattle police officers from before the consent decree until now. And the department has been under federal oversight for 7 years, specifically because of excessive force and biased policing allegations. Well, today's numbers mean they are this much closer to being done with the consent decree, and it shows how much less officers are turning to serious force while policing, even when it's considered justified. So let's take a look at those numbers. Before the consent decree, between 2009 and 2011, the Department of Justice noted serious use of force in more than 1,200 incidents. The same time frame, 8 years later, that number is all the way down to 454. That is a 63% decline in using serious force in general. Now, the city's crediting new policies and training that emphasize de-escalation for that. The change is even more dramatic when you consider force that does not fit into policy. When the Department of Justice first investigated SPD, they said that serious use of force was unconstitutional in 1 out of every 5 cases where it was used. Fast forward 8 years, SPD says there are only 12 cases total that they considered out of policy over a roughly 2-year period.
So if SPD is the one examining their own numbers, who's checking on them to make sure those numbers are in fact correct?
Right. So part of this consent decree process means that SPD is in fact bringing forward their own numbers with self-assessment to prove that they're still staying in compliance. Of course, the Department of Justice is checking those numbers. That's where I got these from.
Okay. So this is very good news for the department, but does it mean the end to the consent decree?
David, they can be so close if they follow along this path. We're talking about January before the city can go to a court and petition to terminate this consent decree. Now, the holdup is that they've clearly made strides with excessive force and other reforms, but a federal judge still says the department has an issue with holding its officers accountable. They used this as an example.
You're escalating this by...
So that's Officer Adley Shepard punching a handcuffed woman after she kicked him back in 2014. He was originally fired, then he was reinstated through an arbitration process. Now, the judge criticized the agreement with the police union in the city that allowed that arbitration to happen. Now the city has just a few months to get back under compliance about how to hold these officers accountable if they do, in fact, want to be able to get out from under federal oversight in January. As we've said, this is such a long process for them. Since 2009, they've been investigated. So we're talking about a decade.
Wow.
Still a lot of work left to do. Big step forward, though.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Simone.